Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 27 of IGEL Weekly. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I've got Chris Feeney from IGEL with us. Chris, saw you last week in Las Vegas, right? Yeah, I saw you last week. You were busy. You were working a booth. How'd that go?
It was interesting, right? I've done probably 10 hymns at this point in my career. So it was definitely less busy, but the folks that did come by, they were more or less approved to be there, and we had great conversations overall. So, but there were definitely moments, I'm going to be honest, when we were tossing the hedgehog around, having fun.
Mhm.
So, but I think, yeah, we got some good visits to the booth, and we were excited to kind of show off a new workflow that we're working on and going to be releasing here in short order. So,
Yeah, do we want to add the workflow to a later podcast, or do we want to
yeah,
talk
I
about it a
think
little bit now?
so. Yeah, we'll talk about it later. We're having a meeting. It's an improvised workflow that we're adding, and I think we're not quite ready to fully share it out, but it's
Mhm.
coming. So
Sure.
I'll give you a heads up on that when we're ready.
Yeah, we'll put it on later. And we have a webinar coming up, XenTegra and IGEL around Windows 365, kind of a deep dive kind of thing coming up too. We'll be promoting that in the coming days, I hope.
Yeah, exciting stuff there. Windows 365 went GA August 2nd, if I'm not mistaken. And if you're on 11.5.170, that firmware supports both. If you ever entitled to both options, WD, or gosh, I keep saying that, AVD.
Mhm.
Thank you, Microsoft, for changing it again. And then obviously the cloud PC stuff. So we're excited to be able to support them right out of the gate. And if you're certainly trying to figure out which one's right for you, Nerdio has a great bunch of stuff out there that kind of sort of lays it out side by side, which path you should go. So
Yeah. So we have Seb back with us. Seb, how's it going?
I'm just coming back from vacation, so I'm feeling pretty ready for link today. So
we were thinking you were in the French Riviera. Is that accurate?
I wish. No, it was the first year, to be honest, where I didn't travel to France one time this year. So I might be doing that in autumn, but let's see how the COVID numbers will increase in France, because at the moment it's pretty high. So we are staying in Germany and worked in the house, made some network stuff, and cleaned a little bit all the paper work I had to do. But thanks for asking. I'm doing pretty fine, and I'm going through all the private builds and all the amazing stuff that Azure released in only 2 weeks. And I must say, the only thing I was a little bit sad about is the 11.06. I was such happy to see that it might be coming just after my vacation, but we had to postpone it for a couple of days, let's say. But it's a game changer firmware, in my opinion. So I'm really looking forward to that one.
Yeah, that will be an exciting release coming soon. I think they pushed it into middle of September. So, but we have other things that have come out. We've had a new UMS version and I think an ICG update too. So the license portal got updated. So other things are getting updated. We could probably talk about those on other podcasts coming in the future.
And all the private builds that are coming out. I mean, it's pretty high amount of private builds which are coming due to new Citrix workspace app, new optimization packages from Cisco or Zoom or whatever. So it's extremely interesting to see how they are working all together, and all the branches are brought back into one major release. And that's what a lot of people are asking for, because just to be clear, the private builds version are extremely stable ones, but they are not official releases that went through the Q&A by our colleagues in Augsburg, so where more or less everything is tested, but really just more pieces of it. They're still supported, but that's why a lot of people are looking for the 11.06 version at the moment. So
that's one interesting thing about IGEL, right? You've got the ability to get private builds for things you need, but definitely if you go that route, keep an eye on the public releases just to see when things show up as officially tested and supported, and you can move forward with them.
Yeah.
So Seb, I do have a quick question for you regarding the podcast in general. What have we done, if anything, which is probably on me, and maybe I just didn't want to overstep, to socialize this podcast on the community?
we did the following. Sorry, the mute button was hit. We are in every meetup, we are telling about new stuff, about new component that we're delivering to the market. And also there we're speaking about the podcast. The other hand is we have a monthly blog post, which I'm writing for the Agile community blog website, where I'm posting all the new Agile related podcasts from XenTegra. So we are promoting there's the Apple, the Google one, Audacity, etc. Also the original on XenTegra.com. And I'm posting there every time the new episode that we recorded. So that's what we're doing at the moment. So there's obviously some additional work to do, but that's what we're doing at the moment.
Yeah, that's great. That's perfect. I guess one other question, someone on the topic of social, LinkedIn. Did Seb ever get a LinkedIn profile created?
Still
I
to be
promise I'm
determined.
working on it.
You're working on it, is that what you said?
Yeah, exactly. The connection is getting pretty poor. How is the weather at the moment in the US?
So I'm actually up in the Northeast in the Boston area. I got to do a presentation for Nutanix with IGEL later this afternoon. I'm in the far reaches of the hotel. So if it's me, then I apologize. I'll try to be a little quiet and let you guys do most of the talking.
I just wanted to avoid your question. It was
No.
more kind of escape moment of your question. It was not really the bad connection.
Yeah. Well, did you, okay. Did you hear us on the last podcast talking about you being in the French Riviera and drinking a fruity drink with a umbrella in it?
No, I didn't, to be honest. I was just reading my emails until now and didn't have the chance to listen to the last podcast, to be absolutely honest. But I will do so this week, I promise.
Yeah.
So that makes me ask the question. Obviously, in the U.S. or in North America, we have the Bahamas, the Caribbean area. We think of fruity drinks with umbrellas and stuff, in Hawaii too, for that matter. In places like the Greek Isles and the French Riviera, I mean, is it like that too? Is it tropical types of cheesy things like the drinks and everything, or is it more hardcore liquors and wines and things? I don't know.
Honestly,
my mind went.
more the second one. It's
one.
not the same temperatures at all. It's not the same humidity at all. So there it's more kind of French, but more, let's say, more Italian approach. So it's a little bit more relaxed, a little bit, I would not say slower, but a little bit, and everything is taking longer. So they are mostly drinking wine and gin tonics, which is more or less the same in the whole France, but there you have more this Mediterranean way of acting. So you have a lot of seafood, you have a lot of healthy food, olive oil and all that stuff, which is a little bit healthier than the rest of France. And there we are mostly drinking wine.
Okay. Yeah, I keep promising my wife we're gonna go someday, and we will. But
I'm with you there, man. I was traveling back from where was it? Prior to HIMSS, I went to Pittsburgh for a trip, and on the way back, the magazine was in front of me, and I picked it up, and first it said Maui, and then I was like, oh, definitely. And so I read that. I said, I'm going to take that with me. And on the second leg, it was Greece, and I was like, that's another place that my wife and I've talked about going. So two places on the bucket list. Hopefully, we'll be able to get out there when this crazy sickness subsides. Hopefully.
Yeah, but you did a good job kind of trailing me along there. I was trying to figure out how you were going to go from Pittsburgh to the Greek Isles in that conversation. But
well, when you're up in the friendly skies and they're still putting those magazines out, sometimes your mind wanders, and when I got a nice picture on the cover, that's what caught me. Yeah. So not to go on a rant, but I'm going on a rant for a second. What do you guys think about, and we'll tie this back to IGEL, right? So I would love to be able to grab my IGEL converted laptop and go on a business trip. But one of the places I struggle the most, and you guys have made this better with the Chromium browser being included, but I struggle the most is the Wi-Fi connectivity on a plane is just horrible. I mean, I can't believe they even charge us money for that stuff. You may get like a 2-hour flight. You may have an hour at the most of actual usable connectivity. Most of the time you're sitting there looking at 1,000 or 2,000 millisecond delays on the latency. Well, that's a great point. I mean, I've used the Wi-Fi, but I don't know if I've used it in a remote computing scenario, right, where I'm connected into like a virtual desktop like you might. I've used it just for doing stuff locally or maybe syncing up or checking emails. But I should probably try that just to see what it's like to have a virtual desktop or something in flight with the crappy wireless. So
I do it all the time, and sometimes it's fine, on some planes, and some planes it's horrible. Maybe it's just maybe legacy technology they have on some of the planes that I ride on.
Probably.
Seb, do you guys, that means Wi-Fi pretty ubiquitous in Europe as far as on airplanes?
I would say you don't have to take an airplane to get bad Wi-Fi in Germany. You just have to go to the train, and it's even worse than every plane that you have in the US, I guess, because there you just have to enter the train. You have no Wi-Fi anymore. From time to time, you have a Wi-Fi. And if you have Wi-Fi, that doesn't mean that you have an online connectivity.
Yeah.
So I can just tell you that the train itself is already pretty poor. And on the plane side, honestly, I never tried because it's extremely expensive here. So they are charging, I can't remember the amount, but it was just a extremely high amount for just a few megabytes that you wanted to transfer. And that's at the moment, at least on the Lufthansa planes where I'm traveling with, just useless, because for the most short planes where I took last year and the year before, it was a, let's say, 1 hour to 1.5 hour plane. And that's honestly something that I can work offline and take all the stuff then back to my online cloud if I'm back somewhere where I have a good connection.
Yeah. Well, let's so let's get onto the topic here. I'm sorry I took us down a rabbit hole a little bit, but it was great catching up and making fun of Seb, sitting on the beach when he really wasn't. All right. Well, next time. All right. So the blog, which is really a vlog, video blog that we're talking about today, is one which is very, very valuable. I've run into this multiple times in my own consulting arena, personally with clients, with some with consultants or engineers on my team, is how to use post-session commands in IGEL, in the IGEL OS. And so, Chris, basically, if you need to do something and the command exists, or you have the capabilities of scripting it in Bash, I guess, is it Bash in the,
yeah.
If you have the ability to script it, you can do anything you need to at the end of a session of some type. And by session, are we talking about a browser session, a Citrix session, a VMware session? What do we mean by session?
Yeah, exactly. The various things that you might be connected to. So how I've used this command from my days covering federal was if a Citrix session, the user finishes, right? They might close it. Do you want some action to take place? Do you want to, say they had been using the browser to get into that session? Do you want the browser just to be closed? Do you want the user to be logged off of IGEL, which would then, generally speaking, log you right back in, and you're back at, maybe a login screen for Citrix or something, or VMware or whatever. But basically, the session that you had goes away, and then you want to have an action take place as a result. Maybe it's some built-in options that we have in the drop-down list, or you can run a custom command, which I've used I kind of like look at it as workflow actions. So if a user pulls their smart card, for example, then you can say, oh, we recognize the card's been pulled, take this action, using this custom command. Or you could just do the basic, commands like log off or shut down or reboot or whatever. So.
And that's important, like say a Citrix virtual desktop world where you want the user to have a very clean experience post their virtual desktop. So you take them all the way out. It's also often a security play where you don't want anybody coming up behind them and tailgating and getting into their sessions.
Yeah, so, certainly on shared machines, especially.
So Seb, you're the author, the director, the star of the show of the video blog that you did, and you've got it broken into introduction, demo, definition, post-session, and updates, and then combined commands. Let's start with the intro, and let's just talk about what you cover in the intro and why you did the video.
Sure. So, like on every tutorial that we are publishing on the Azure community website, it's mostly related to questions that are coming up in the Azure community. So, why is this feature there? How can I use that? Is there maybe an advanced feature set that we might be aware of? And the post-session topic is something that can be extremely huge because you can do, like you already said, Chris, more or less everything there. But in the same time, we have to be a little bit careful because obviously it's something that is run in a specific context, which, let's say, higher rights. So you can do a lot of bets up there too. So what I tried to explain that in that tutorial is, firstly, we have a firmware customization part of our firmware, which enables us to change, enhance, tweak the general behavior of our IGEL operating system. One part is, let's say, the easy part from the function itself. It's the possession command. The possession command is something that you can deliver per profile and say, if a specific session is ended, do a specific action. That sounds pretty easy, and it is in general, but it's not only checking if a process is there or if a specific remote network port is there. We have now exit codes coming from the different client components, like the AVD client, like the VMware View Horizon client, like the Citrix Workspace app. And I must admit, for people who are listening to the podcast, that the possession command behavior at the moment is, I would call it unstable or maybe unreliable. And we are working on it. So if you have lost maybe the trust in that feature, give us let's say a few weeks until 11.06 is coming back, and we might see some changes there. So coming back to the possession command itself, we have.
Hey Seb, going
Yeah.
back to that, I have never had any instability with that at all. Is this something new that's come up, or is it like, is it specific to one post-session type of scenario? What's that mean?
I must say our colleagues in support may give way more detailed information about that than I do. But in my case, I can say that mostly to the Citrix Workspace and VMware View Horizon situation, it just happens that as soon as you close a session with the X, or if you close a session by logging off, nothing happens. And you can enter whatever command you want, a shutdown, a reboot, a specific Linux command, whatever you like, and we just have nothing. Fun fact is that if you update the firmware to another one, or downgrade maybe to the last version just before, it will work. And so we are aware of that. It's not something that we never heard of. So just in case someone is listening and saying, hey, possession is useless, it isn't. It's like the display switcher topic. It's getting even more complex than it was before, and we have to cover a lot of use cases, and we are working on it. So please be patient. I promise we are getting better on that one.
Yeah. So while you're talking, I'm just checking internal. We had some chatter in Teams, and this was under a Citrix channel about some of the post-session commands when they got to a certain version, 11.05, for example, it wasn't working, but some of the custom commands were working fine. I'm looking here at one post where I had provided one of those custom commands that I had used, excuse me, related to smart cards, and that one is still working solid. I've never had any issues with it, and I actually got that from one of our developers. So I think the question, it depends, right? So, but as Seb mentioned, obviously Dev is aware of it, and whatever it is resolved. It might be something with a Citrix post-session command. It might be VMware related or whatever, but there are potential workarounds depending on the situation, or it might be just that, stay at this version of firmware, and then when you go to this one, everything will be fine. So you might skip over one or two or so, but.
So it's kind of like a little bump in the road. Historically, this thing's worked great for me. So it sounds like it got broke somewhere, which is all the more reason, no matter what solution you're using, that Q&A and testing and validation is extremely important.
Yeah,
definitely. That the biggest challenge with the private builds and version that we're delivering to the market at the moment, that what we already discussed at the beginning, we have so much new components to integrate, newest 0-day support for Citrix Workspace app and whatever. And we are aware of a lot of changes that this vendor may be introduced in their clients, but not in everything, since we are not covering, let's say, every bits and byte that Citrix or VMware Horizon developers change. And that's, I guess, sometimes just a kind of, communication misgap or whatever. So just in case, we are working on it, and if you have a version where it works, it will stay on that, definitely. And we are working on getting that thing sorted out as soon as possible.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's just just a short intro into the post-session command topic. For those of you who are listening who never use a post-session command itself, it's a feature that is integrated into IGEL OS, I would say, since OS 5, if I remember right. So it's really an old feature, which was enhanced a lot between different major release versions that we developed. The biggest topic that we had at the beginning was that the post-session command. So you want to shut down your device as soon as you close the Citrix session, because you're leaving your workplace, you're closing your Citrix session, and then want to click on Start, Shut Down, or push the shutdown button on your hardware. The post-session command will do that automatically for you. So as soon as your last Citrix session is closed, the device will shut down or will reboot if you want to get a clean environment, if you're in a call center, like an example, or in the healthcare sector, and you want to get a clean desktop, you can also do a log off. So just a log off of the local user and re-log on from the local user perspective. Use it with Active Directory. So as soon as you closed your Citrix session and you are still logged in on the IGEL endpoint with your Active Directory account, it would be a good idea to logging off the local Active Directory user too. And that's something that the post-session command can deliver quite easily.
Yeah. It's fun to play around with.
If you're not, if you're not even logged in, you can actually just do a log off of the local, like the local session, right? I mean, that's how we've used it historically, but I love what you were just talking about of logging off the actual AD user out of Linux, aka IGEL, as well.
Yeah, it's fun to play around with, just trying different scenarios. If you have enabled the AD login to get to IGEL's desktop, and then you have a session, it closes, you could issue that log off, and it does take them back to that login screen. I've also used one that I found, it's called a clean desktop command, and without logging off, it basically closes any processes that might be running and sort of returns you back to the main IGEL desktop. That's I've used that when I wanted to close out like a browser or something after a Citrix session. But yeah, there's some fun stuff. Play around with it. Certainly, if you're not familiar with that, you can look up post-session commands on our KB and find some of the examples there. And just know that you have a session, Citrix, VMware, whatever. If you close it or whatever, then you can execute those commands. When that process essentially goes away, that's kind of sort of monitoring that process, like wfike or whatever. As soon as you see it go away, then execute this command. So
that's Seb, just to make sure I didn't miss it, because it's specifically in the demo you're showing. In this case, you're doing is it a Citrix connection, and then you're ending the Citrix connection, either log off or disconnect. Now, was it an app you demoed or a full desktop?
If I remember right, it was a full desktop that I started. So in that case, it was the terminal server connection in full screen. Yeah. But it would be the same for a VDI session, also from a single app perspective. So even a published application published through the Xen app without a full desktop around it would work exactly the same way. Yeah. So yes, it's independent from the way you're delivering the application. As soon as the last application is closed, that behavior will happen.
All right. So quick aside conversation here. In that desktop session where you're using no viewer toolbar, the Citrix viewer toolbar, or the IGEL viewer toolbar?
Honestly, I would have to look into the feature set, but I'm usually using the IGEL one, because it's something that, I'm used to, and that's, I would say, most of my former customers are using it. Yeah. But it would be exactly the same if you would disable the IGEL toolbar and would use the Citrix one that you can enable in the registry, like an example.
Yeah, we don't, not to go into a lot of detail, but I know that's a topic that's come up in my world several times with customers. That's probably a topic for a later date, is the differences between no toolbar, the IGEL toolbar,
Yeah.
the Citrix toolbar, and going back to the first one where maybe you use the like the TS disconnect or whatever it is command within Windows, and the good, bad, and the ugly of all three.
Yeah.
So Chris, any further topics on the demo that Seb did, and why he did that one, or what happened? And then Seb's going to go into this next section, which is define a post-session command.
Yeah, I've got a drop, but I think, as you mentioned, you see these questions probably post up in the Slack channel and community. And so, sort of pulling those commonly asked questions into a blog post like this, to kind of highlight a feature that maybe some people didn't even know existed, but it's very powerful when you're really trying to put, as I like to look at it, the desired workflow together. The user, if you can automate some of that user experience, and for example, if the customer is using the web browser to get into Citrix versus the receiver, and then they close their Citrix session or whatever, maybe they use the black toolbar, maybe they did some kind of thing, but the session goes away, applications, whatever, but the Citrix browser is still up and the user is walking away, they're still logged in. Now the Citrix might time out with the browser, but you can also run a post session command and just say close the browser, and I like that. If you're using the receiver, you could just do the same thing by running a pn log off command, and that logs out of receiver workspace app. And then you can say sleep for 2 seconds, for example, and then fire it right back up so the next user comes up and can log right back in, whatever. So there's a lot of things you can kind of play around with, and it's kind of fun to.
So quick note on that whole topic, and this is a whole other direction slightly, but with the Citrix Workspace app, I was talking to one of the product managers the other day, and they realized they've got to put a timeout in the Workspace app for scenarios like this. So if somebody walks away, doesn't lock it, or somebody hasn't done what we've done here and put a timer in, after 5 minutes, the Citrix Workspace app will require authentication to get back into it.
I know exactly what you're talking about, and we could probably go down that hole. I would love to. I do have to jump for this other thing that I mentioned earlier, but maybe we could tailor that for another conversation. So
sure.
Awesome.
All right, thanks, Chris.
Gentlemen, it's always a pleasure.
Seb, the next section is titled "Define a Post-Session Command." What is that covering?
It's now really covering the configuration itself. I mean, where to find that post-session command, in which section of your profile, and how to reproduce the behavior that I showed in the demo. So basically, if you go to System, Firmware Customization, and there to your post-session command section, you have there the ability to choose in your custom commands which kind of session you want to get between marks monitored. So you have, like for Citrix, some ADP sessions, 2 different entries. So you have a Citrix and Citrix via browser, if I remember right, or Citrix per browser. And that's a difference. Since we're not monitoring the same kind of exit codes for a specific process, we have to choose between one of them. I will cover in a few minutes if we could maybe combine both of them, but let's say on the first one. So let's imagine that you are using the Mozilla Firefox web browser as a main access to your storefront on Netscaler. Then just having the Citrix entry, so session type, used for a log off or reboot post-session command might not work. So that's where you have to use the Citrix via browser, because there, as soon as the last session and maybe the browser is closed, then it will react and execute a specific command. So to summarize, you have to choose which kind of sessions you need to you want to be monitored, and then in the second time choose the command that you want to execute, because just choosing the session type will not do anything. You have to choose a specific post-session command. And there you have a couple of predefined options that we are delivering by standard. So the first one is log off. Log off means that the local user that you are seeing if you're logging into the IGEL OS operating system, if you're not using Active Directory, it will be the user. if you're using Active Directory, uname@udomain.com. Doing a logoff would mean that your desktop would be cleaned or your session would be disconnected and you will come back to the desktop or to the Active Directory login mask. So that's basically a security feature that I would highly recommend to anyone, because let's imagine the following. We already covered a part of it in another podcast that we recorded with you, Andy. Let's imagine that you're leaving your workspace for lunch and you're closing your Citrix session, or you're just locking your Citrix session, the session itself. If I would be a malicious person, I would come then during your launch, press Windows D and minimize all the windows to the taskbar. And then I would have access to all the applications listed on the desktop on the start menu, because you are just locked the terminal server VDI session, but not the local one. If you would close your session because saying, okay, I will close it, I will come back after lunch, then the endpoint will automatically log off, clean up your desktop, and restart the login mechanism of the Citrix Workspace App Client, or bringing you back into the Active Directory. So that's the main purpose of the logoff command that we deliver. Then we have our second, let's say, section, which is all the shutdown and suspend. We have a standard default action, which is defined like on Windows. What should happen if I press shutdown in the start menu or around the hardware button? That's something that you can configure in your profile, and would mean that if you would have put a suspend instead of shutdown as a standard behavior, it would just go through that. But it will show the standard countdown dialog that you might know from IGEL OS, which is 20 seconds in general, and will wait until that shutdown countdown to end, and then it would shut down. So you could have the ability to interrupt the process. If you don't need that, or you say, no, honestly, I don't want to give the end user or whoever is in front of the PC the ability to interrupt that, then you can go directly into the without dialog mode, which means that it will execute the shutdown process immediately.
Right. You know, Seb,
yeah.
When I think IGEL, I'll make the statement, you guys have thought of everything. And in comparison to many of the other thin client software companies, I'll say software specifically, because that's what we're talking about here. It's true. I mean, it took some convincing for me to jump on the IGEL train, but when I saw a couple of these things where I'm like, well, what do you mean? You've already thought through those things I've struggled with for years. It's just a highlight for IGEL.
Great to hear. Yeah, that's exactly the approach as we try to cover, is to getting even more user friendly. I don't say that we don't want our users to think or to think by themselves, not at all. They're still obliged to do that. But if you can simplify their daily tasks, then it's definitely something that we are trying to integrate in the IGEL OS operating platform. Yeah.
Well, and to change your words slightly, user and administrator friendly.
Right. Exactly.
You look at administrators as users, and it's, you make it clear that it's for both, right? I mean, we want that user experience and the administrative capabilities and ease of use, all that great stuff.
100%.
So I'm not sure if you're through with that section. I kind of cut you off. If we can go on to the post-session updates conversation, that might be where we're at in the discussion, or not?
Let me just maybe go through the last point, or the last 2 points. I mean, the reboot one is pretty easy, so it will be covered in 1 second. Doing a reboot instead of a shutdown. What a surprise. Nothing really highly interesting to mention. But the last one in that menu is something that is extremely interesting. It's called Enter Custom Command Here. We'll cover that a little bit later on, but just mentioning it. Chris already said a few words about that just before leaving. He has a PN logoff command, or he has a desktop cleanup command that he is using in Linux. Yep. That's something that you can then enter as a Linux command line command into that section. And that's something that we are using extremely often, also to optimize the update process. And that's a perfect handover to the next section.
Yeah, if it's a built-in command that's not been surfaced through the UI through IGEL, you can run it. If it's a script that you're capable of writing, you can run it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the power.
Yeah, totally. So coming back to your question on the update rollout process, let's imagine the following. That's something that I have to speak a bit more theoretically, but it's still applicable. I guess I covered it at the end of or at the third part of the other tutorial. Didn't have the video in front of me, but from what I recall, I did the following because it's something that was quite usual. Let's imagine that you want to deploy a firmware update to, I don't know, 10 or 20 or 10,000 devices in your company. Beside all the sizing stuff about where to put the update, how to use the body update feature, that's another topic. Let's say on the standard way, I want to deploy that update. One approach could be to send update right now to all my devices, which would be great, but it would interrupt the work of all my users, which is not that great. So our approach is to say, okay, hey, why not doing the update when the device is shutting down? So that's something that I can send out as a command from the context menu in my IGEL OS, or even better, doing a job, so a scheduled task inside of my UMS and sending that command out to my device and saying, hey, as soon as you as a device will shut down, please don't forget to download the update process, execute the update process, and then shut down. So as soon as you send out that command to your devices, you would have to wait that your end user is clicking the start menu, the shutdown button, and waiting for the timeout to happen, and then the update process will start. Might work in some specific companies where you have an 8 to 5 job and no one is working in a shift worker situation or whatever. But in the main field where you have also teleworkers, etc., you never know if the device will be shut down as soon as the user is leaving the company or his home office room. So that's where the possession command makes even more sense. Just remember that we said as soon as you have a possession command, which says as soon as Citrix ends, please shut down my device as a possession command. Remember, we sent out the command to my device, hey, update when you shut down. So now as a user, I just close my Citrix, I'm leaving the house, and at the next morning, when I turn up my device, it's on the last 11.06, that the upcoming version updated without any kind of personal interaction or sending out a message to all my users, please shut down your device this evening because we are doing an update.
It seems like a really elegant and controllable way to get it done and not interrupt the users.
Yeah, exactly.
And you know, we need happy users.
More than ever at the moment, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the last section is combined commands. I find this interesting, and I'm curious to see how you do this.
So we are at the moment, and I would say since the beginning of last year, from perspective we're seeing from our customers, evaluating a lot of different situations. Some people are staying on Citrix, are staying on VMware, or staying on maybe RDS or AVD. But we see a lot of changes because of financial restrictions, sometimes because of support questions. So people are moving around from Citrix to something else, or maybe from, I don't know, from RDS to AVD, but they're not doing that from one day to another. You will have test users, you will have people who are working in different companies, maybe because you are delivering services for one company then to another, and you have to connect to Citrix one day, to RDP the next day, etc. So the possession command in the old world, where you just had one possession command and session type, you couldn't combine different sessions without tweaking in the command line. It was possible, but not from the GUI side. So let's imagine you have Citrix and AVD session. You close the Citrix session and you configure the session type as AVD, nothing will happen. On the same hand, if you configured Citrix and not AVD, it would not shut down the device if the AVD session is closed. That's where the changes, I would have to lie if it was 11 or 3 or 4, but I guess it was 4. We introduced the new possession command approach and saying, hey, you can do however session or how many sessions you want, in that specific session type and say, as soon as Citrix and or AVD is closed, then close or shut down my device.
Yeah.
What if, yeah, sorry.
No, I was just shaking my head. I mean, as you began to talk about that, I started thinking and or scenarios.
It's extremely hard to, I must admit that I'm not sure if I'm saying something wrong. So just let me double check something on the post-session command part. I'm just coming back from vacation. I lost a little bit of my memory, to be honest. So we have the ability to combine them. So action is current after the end of session selected. Yeah, it's an or, it's not an and. So as soon as Citrix or ADP is closed, the action will be performed. But in that, honestly, let me just fire up my UMS and we can continue speaking. Sure. It would be interesting to see how it performs if I have a Citrix session and
when you're ready, we'll give you the screen. You can even show your screen when you're ready. It's being recorded, the video. At some point, we're going to.
Sure. Hold on. I will definitely do so. Let me just configure my endpoint back to something more useful. So I just have to switch back from my appliance mode, which I tested yesterday for specific behavior. And then I'm ready to share.
Okay.
So I just have host disabled participant screen sharing. So I have to wait a couple of seconds for you, Andy.
Sure.
Did you enable it in the meantime? Because I'm not able to.
Oh, I got to stop mine. Hold on. Let me stop my share.
Yep. Here we go. No, host disabled participant screen sharing at the moment.
All right. Hold on. I'll get you going.
Take your time.
Oh, I just made you co-host. You should have the power.
Yep, they're perfect. So let me just share my VMware workstation. So here you see my IGEL OS endpoints, virtually spoken, and a web browser session that I created locally.
So Seb, that is your test, that is your demo unit, right? Your demo virtual machine. And exactly. You've got maybe the IGEL management console somehow published to it or something?
In that specific case, no. I'm still having it on the left hand as a virtual machine.
Oh no, you're using local setup. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry. So let me go through the configuration. So like we already discussed in the system, firmware customization and custom commands post session. I can now say Citrix. Yeah. Let
me say for the group, right? That's what's one of the beautiful things about IGEL is local profiles and UMS hosted profiles are almost 100% identical. So you don't even have to have a UMS environment to play around with stuff. It's awesome.
Exactly.
Yep.
So we have now the session type Citrix and the session type browser, which is now enabled for a log off post session command. Mm-hmm. Let's apply that one. Let me start the terminal server session, which is hopefully working right now. Yes, that's looking good. And let me start at the same time browser session locally that time. Just let it start and let me check now. If I close the browser session, nothing happens. Let me close the Citrix session now.
And by now I would expect off, disconnect would have done the same thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. So log off. It might be that case where the post session command is not working like expected. So I wouldn't be surprised, but let me double check again. So I'm starting my Netscaler configuration. Here we go, the notepad is starting.
Okay, so for our listeners, they couldn't see what just happened. So you killed both the RDP, the browser session, and the RDP. Was it RDP or Citrix that you had set up for?
Citrix.
So Citrix, and it did not log off the local IGEL OS. So we're trying it again.
Exactly. And now I'm killing the last window with Citrix and nothing is happening either. So I would say I might have just catch up a version that is not working like expected on the post-session command. So I would say,
Well, take out one of them, take out the browser one and just leave it, or just take out the Citrix one, maybe even. Whatever
here
order
we
you want to
go.
do. So session
I'll
type
just-
Citrix, when the Citrix session ends, either disconnect or log off, we expect to see
Exactly.
a log off of the local IGEL Linux OS.
That's what I would like to see at least, yeah. Here we go, and sign out. But I'm really a bit wondering because it was working for the tutorial. On the tutorial, I guess I was on 11.5.133. So let me check if the ADP session is not configured at the moment. So honestly, I would have to bring up that answer next time when we will meet Andy, but I will definitely do some testing. I was thinking and or, but I must admit it might be or in that case.
But we don't know. We don't know. We had, we didn't have the result either way we were looking for. So yeah, absolutely. Just, we'll revisit this next session, and you'll be able to tell us maybe which versions have the issue and which versions don't.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I will do some testing.
You're trying the browser one now.
Yeah, just instead of the Citrix session.
Because you kind of mentioned earlier that the issue that there you go. You mentioned earlier that
here we go.
The post Citrix session thing was somehow tied to the latest version of the Citrix Workspace app.
No, in that case, it would be independent from that. But you thought that main session Citrix didn't work. So the browser one worked like expected. So let me just do some.
So for our listeners / users, go toggle, and this may not fix the issue, but go toggle your Citrix, the Workspace app you're using, go use an older one, and let's just see if it works.
Yeah, I will do so. Hold on.
So for our listeners, that's one of the most powerful, and it's probably the thing that got me hooked on IGEL to begin with, is the ability to have the ability just to toggle between different versions of the Citrix receiver, Workspace app, whatever you want to call it. And that was something I just troubleshot with another thin client vendor, and it took me days of flashing firmware to get the answer I was looking for. And with IGEL, just a simple drop down fixed the problem. I was hooked.
Yeah, might be okay. Let me check if the 20 version is working better. I was just testing the 19, which might be a little bit too hard for the environment in that case. So here we go. Let me check. That one should definitely work from what I recall.
Yeah, well, we'll find out.
So I'm just switching from Citrix Workspace at 19 to 20 in that case. And letting the WordPad opening again.
Nothing like a live demo on demand, right?
Exactly. But it's honestly working better than expected, because usually after a vacation period, you are coming back and nothing is working. So
that didn't work. So take out the session one, take out the browser session one.
I will just move that one. Exactly. I will just move to just main session Citrix, keep on log off, doing all the procedure again. And here we go.
And we've got about 2 minutes before we have to wrap up, but this is good.
That's definitely an interesting one. No, we should already see a log of process here.
Well, look, work on your lab, and then we'll bring it back up next time and talk about it.
Perfect.
Yeah. Oh, look, you even have Citrix via browser. Does that work for the Chromium browser as well, or just the? Okay.
No
worries.
No.
Okay. Well, and you don't need, the Firefox browser, if you're just doing Citrix in a session, is perfectly fine. Yeah.
So we'll do some testing on my side. Sorry for not being able to answer that one directly, but I would definitely do some testing.
That's all right. Well, Seb, I appreciate you joining and covering this post-session command topic. It is huge. If you're a IGEL administrator, an IGEL user, it's important that you understand post-session commands. I don't think I was, but maybe one engagement into IGEL before I needed it. And then, it would have been great to have had this video and this blog and this podcast, at that point in time, but I just had to, find somebody who could talk to me about it. And, I think that if you're an IGEL administrator, this topic is important and you should know it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, Seb. Well, I appreciate you joining me today, and we'll do it again in 2 weeks.
Hopefully, yes, I would be there with hopefully some answers. And thank you again for organizing all the podcast stuff. It's really highly appreciated.
All right, man. Get your LinkedIn profile created.
I will.
I will. That was a weak commitment. All right. See you.
Okay.